people could surrender their agency to something that isn't actually possessing this godlike super intelligence, but have just been told it is. And I think, that potentially could be very dangerous.
Whitney Webb is a woman who frequently tells people the truth, and her revelation about how BlackRock is aiming to create a class of slaves for itself is her biggest revelation yet.
Yeah, I definitely don't agree with that at all, because I think humans should not surrender their agency. And I think it's sort of, in that scenario I sort of just laid out, if it's overhyped and it's claimed that it reached that.
Whitney Webb says that when a crisis occurs, people frequently react emotionally, motivated by fear. This emotional reaction frequently stifles critical, reasonable thinking, making it impossible for the public to thoroughly analyze the best policies. In instances like the COVID-19 epidemic, she observes, the focus tends to be on the immediate crisis, in this example, public health, while broader problems, such as economic policy, may not receive the same attention. She believes that if Americans' economic activity or purchasing power were substantially harmed during future crises, the public would demand immediate fixes without fully contemplating the long-term consequences. Recognizing this emotional response, governments frequently suggest remedies that are not openly or carefully debated. This was evident during the COVID-19 reaction when key economic policy decisions were taken behind closed doors. She brought up BlackRock, a huge financial management organization, as an example of an entity that predicted the economic slowdown caused by COVID-19 and provided solutions to central bankers before the crisis became fully apparent.
And, like with COVID-19, BlackRock anticipated the next downturn about a month before the repo market started going haywire, and presented to central bankers, this is the policy you should implement during the next downturn. And it's very possible that BlackRock is working on policy papers, for central bankers or other people in the U.S. government about what policy should be implemented if, this type of crisis happens or that type of crisis happens. It seems like they seem to be designing the policies, I guess.
Webb argues that BlackRock is already determining future crisis responses through policy suggestions, with several of its former executives holding critical positions in the Biden administration. These individuals have had an impact on economic policy, and their engagement is projected to continue, defining the next financial crisis response. Interestingly, she pointed out that, despite BlackRock's considerable position, there has been little media scrutiny of their effect on the government, notably on the Biden and Harris economic teams. She expresses concern about the absence of public debate and knowledge. Similarly, fiscal remedies to COVID-19, such as bank bailouts, were carried out with little scrutiny, despite the fact that BlackRock was involved in these actions before COVID was declared a pandemic. It is obvious that history tends to repeat itself, with BlackRock so thoroughly embedded in U.S. economic policy, particularly inside the Democratic administration. She believes they will once again dominate the response to future crises. She sees her responsibility as increasing awareness so that there can be a public conversation before the next crisis occurs, when fear and emotional reactions may once again take precedence. Here, Whitney also raises an important question. Who should be in control of fiscal policy during a crisis? Webb says she doesn't have a precise solution, but is concerned about the revolving door between Wall Street and the U.S. Treasury.
I don't necessarily have the best answer to that, I guess, because I think our current system, specifically as it relates to, the U.S. Treasury Department, has consistently been a revolving door for the last several decades with Wall Street. And like Goldman Sachs, for example, has had very significant former Goldman Sachs executives have held very prominent roles at the Treasury when crises have emerged. So as an example, you have one of the top guys at Goldman Sachs, Robert Rubin, being a key figure in the Clinton administration's economic policy as Treasury Secretary, and helping engineer the repeal of Glass-Steagall, which creates, arguably the 2008 financial crisis, when George W. Bush's Secretary Treasury at the time the crisis happens is Henry Paulson, another former top guy from Goldman Sachs, that allegedly told members of Congress if they didn't bail out the banks that martial law may be declared in the United States.
She cites historical examples of famous Wall Street people, particularly from Goldman Sachs, who have been appointed to high-level Treasury jobs during prior crises. This includes characters such as Robert Rubin during the Clinton administration and Henry Paulson under George W. Bush, both of whom established economic policies that, according to Webb, had a harmful impact on average Americans. In order for significant change to occur, structural reforms must be implemented to avoid the revolving door between Wall Street and the government, guaranteeing that budgetary policies during times of crisis prioritize the needs of ordinary citizens over the interests of big financial organizations. There is a tendency in U.S. government leadership, particularly inside the Treasury, in which individuals in authority frequently appear to be more aligned with Wall Street's interests than those of ordinary Americans. This is not simply a Treasury concern either. She discusses a bigger issue within the government, in which regulated sectors manage to place their own personnel in crucial regulatory positions, a situation known as regulatory capture. According to her, the revolving door between big business and government implies that crisis response measures frequently benefit the powerful over the broader population. Before we can expect a government response that actually favors Main Street rather than Wall Street, we must break the cycle of influence. So how can we accomplish that? First, it is critical to identify what the interests of ordinary Americans, Main Street, are. She feels that the typical American wants their tax funds to be utilized properly, rather than to reward international businesses, particularly in defense. And she talks about a grievance that's pretty common: the misappropriation of taxpayer funds. Over the years, a large portion of tax revenue has been diverted into the military-industrial complex, fueling conflicts that may benefit companies more than the general public.
Well, I think regular Americans would like to stop having their money stolen from them or being misused on things where it's basically being sent to enrich multinational corporations, particularly in the war industry, where you have a lot of, there's been a lot said over the past several years, decades really, about the military-industrial complex and how a lot of the wars that U.S. empire goes to start in other countries generates
Whitney,
a windfall.
I'm gonna stop you. I'm gonna stop you really fast, just because you know this stuff so well that you'll fractal into 10 more extremely valid issues. But I want to start with, you just said regular Americans want to stop their money being stolen from them. I will say, I don't think the average American realizes that their money's being stolen. Whenever I bring that up, I feel like I'm screaming into the void. So how exactly are Americans' dollars being stolen from them?
Okay, I would say it's going to things that are not actually building necessary infrastructure or
Do you mean
meeting
tax?
Americans.
Americans may not recognize it, but Webb believes that money is being taken from them. Not directly, but through mismanagement and redirection of taxes to things that do not benefit them, such as unnecessary wars and corporate profits. I mean, just look at studies by figures such as Catherine Austin Fitts and Mark Skidmore, who indicated that around $21 trillion in taxpayer funds was unaccounted for, money that simply vanished. She claims that this is a prime illustration of how taxpayer dollars are being effectively stolen. When questioned if taxes is theft, Webb does not provide a direct answer, but does suggest that in the current system, where she alleges organized crime and intelligence networks have penetrated the government, tax monies are not being spent in ways that actually benefit the public. Instead, this money is being diverted to corrupt ventures or misappropriated in international aid with no oversight. She cites nation-building initiatives in Iraq and Afghanistan, which she claims yielded little but money laundered back into the hands of contractors and other groups. Domestically, she talked about several examples in which contractors are paid with government money, yet fail to deliver on their commitments with little to no accountability.
An insane amount of money was spent on quote-unquote nation building during the war on terror in Afghanistan and Iraq, for example, with really nothing to show for it. And arguably, and some people have really effectively argued that it was really a money laundering operation at the end of the day, a way to sort of take taxpayer money and then have it go to the hands of these contractors and other entities, and it ends up elsewhere with nothing to show for it in these particular situations. And I think there's plenty of waste and plenty of examples also in the US domestically where contractors have been given taxpayer money to do things and they don't actually do the things that they're supposed to do. And there's really very little accountability for those things when they happen because a lot of people aren't really aware or really follow up on where their taxpayer money is going. And there's a lot of trust that I think people have placed in congressional representatives that they're going to do that due diligence for them, but most people in Congress are multimillionaires who are funded by billionaires and multi-billionaires and tend to have the interests of those people at heart and not exactly, the regular Americans who are in a very different economic situation than them.
Webb contends that many Americans rely on their political representatives to control this spending, but these officials are frequently millionaires who are backed by even larger groups. This suggests that they are unlikely to prioritize the demands of regular Americans. The podcast also talked about broader economic shifts, such as the outsourcing of U.S. industries, which has hurt American workers over the past several decades. This trend is tied to powerful tech giants and billionaires, whom Webb says fund both political parties. These elites, according to her, are now pushing the country toward a new system involving digital IDs, digital wallets, and universal basic income. UBI, a system slowly being introduced and promoted as part of a larger agenda.
I guess sort of this coming together of digital IDs, digital wallets, UBI, a lot of these things are sort of being slowly developed and sort of like promoted to people. But I think ultimately, you would only have that type of situation where UBI is necessary.
I just want to make sure that we go point by point right now. Okay, so all of that makes sense to me, but I want to go back because when I think about what the interests of the average American are, it's I want to be able to take care of my family. I want things to come in at a reasonable cost. I want to be able to save for the future. I want to leave something for my kids, and I want to make sure that my kids have a better future than I have. I feel like if you have that for the vast majority of any nation, I literally think it's completely agnostic. I think that's just what humans crave.
Sure.
If you have that for people, you will have a healthy, thriving society. Assuming we're in agreement with all of that, even if you're BlackRock and you're super greedy, it does not make sense to hollow out the middle class because eventually, as history teaches us, they come for you.
And this really means we have to talk about the troubling reality of where society might be heading, pointing out that we're potentially on the brink of a dangerous shift. Imagine a future where the middle class vanishes, leaving just two groups, the elites and everyone else. This isn't some far-fetched dystopian novel. It's the kind of world some of today's most powerful institutions seem to be pushing us toward. Whitney argues that this isn't just about greed. It's about restructuring society into a new kind of feudal system where a tiny elite controls the masses. At the core of this transformation is something called technocracy, a scientific dictatorship led by a highly educated, tech-savvy elite. It's not a conspiracy theory. People like Dennis Meadows, connected to influential organizations like the Club of Rome, have talked about reducing the global population or imposing strict control over it. Meadows suggests that either we shrink the population to give everyone more freedom, or we let the experts run things for the 7 or 8 billion people left on the planet. It's a chilling choice, but it's not just him. Silicon Valley titans like Eric Schmidt also seem to think this future is inevitable, one where AI will rule our lives. Schmidt even co-wrote a book with Henry Kissinger, the bomber of Iraq, proposing a world where there are two classes, those who understand and control AI, and those who are controlled by it.
And there are some thinkers in Silicon Valley, like Eric Schmidt, for example, who wrote a book on AI with Henry Kissinger, that essentially say that there's going to be this sort of future brought to us by AI, where there will be the class of people that understand how AI works, that program and maintain it. And then there will be this underclass, really, they don't say underclass, but I would say that, of people who AI acts upon, who can't understand what AI is doing to them. And eventually, because of their dependence on AI, will become cognitively diminished and mentally unable, essentially, to make decisions for themselves without AI's help. And there's a lot of other indications, I would argue, whether it's UBI, which again is going to be for I don't think, the top oligarchs in Silicon Valley, like Bill Gates and Reid Hoffman and Peter Thiel, are going to be receiving UBI. I think it's intended to be for other people that aren't necessarily in that economic tier. I think it's very likely you're going to see, if these people succeed in their designs, really more of a two-tier society without any sort of need for a middle class.
We really have to realize how this AI-driven society could diminish human autonomy. People might become so reliant on AI that they stop thinking for themselves. AI could even replace creativity and art. What happens when humans lose their ability to create because machines do it all for them? It's the same phenomenon we see with calculators. Since most people have smartphones, we don't bother doing mental math anymore. But this reliance goes deeper. If AI becomes the primary driver of culture, art, and decision-making, we could lose those human qualities that define us. Even scarier, Whitney points out that governments and powerful entities are already figuring out how to manipulate public perception. A study funded by the US Air Force in 2014 explored how social media could be used to control people like drones. Tailoring what we see online, based on our personal data, could create a kind of mass mind control. And with advances in AI and deepfake technology, it might become nearly impossible for the average person to know what's real anymore. But why are the elites pushing for such a system? Whitney thinks that they might feel confident they can keep society in check through manipulation, especially with the power of AI and social media at their disposal. If you control the information people receive, you can control their thoughts and actions. And once people are hooked on AI and can't function without it, rebellion becomes less likely. People might not even realize they're being controlled.
There's states around the world that have an arsenal of these digital weapons that are meant to manipulate us in our perception of reality and what's real. And if you can, use AI or other means to control how people perceive reality, you can control their behavior and a lot of other things. So I think they're confident in that. And obviously there's probably other things that I'm leaving out, but that's, sort of what comes to mind, at least at first for me, when in regards to that question.
Then there's the bigger question: should we trust AI to make decisions for us? Whitney clearly leans toward human freedom over AI control, arguing that we should not surrender our agency to machines, no matter how smart they become. It's a slippery slope, she warns. Once we start letting AI dictate our lives, governments could use it as an excuse to push unpopular policies, deflecting blame onto the perfect algorithm. In her view, humans should never give up their creative and decision-making abilities to machines, no matter how convenient or efficient they seem. The risk is too high, especially if the so-called intelligence behind AI is exaggerated or manipulated for someone else's gain. And in a world where deep fakes and algorithmic control are becoming more prevalent, it's easy to see how we could be misled into giving up more than we realize. What do you think, folks? Do you think Whitney is right about this? Is corporate America trying to control us? Let us know in the comments below.